and you couldn't even run.
All right, Ralph.
And Larry, we just got this word. A high-ranking city police official says the number of people killed or injured could be in the thousands. Of course, that's a vague statement as well, but high-ranking city police officials saying the number of people killed or injured could be in the thousands. We're talking about the World Trade Center, and elsewhere, of course, we've had at least 4 planes go. 2 crashes of United planes, one in western Pennsylvania. We don't know about the other, with people aboard those planes. And also, it is now pretty much confirmed that the 2 planes that went into the World Trade Center towers were American Airlines planes that had been hijacked. Larry?
Yes, that's essentially what Mayor Giuliani was saying earlier, that it had to be in the thousands, the death toll here. We haven't heard any numbers yet. Of course, you can imagine in the rubble downtown, they're going to be finding bodies for some time. Some of the things that are closed, all of downtown for that matter, is closed. Lower Manhattan has been shut off. You cannot drive into Lower Manhattan, only emergency personnel going in there. The stock markets are closed. And Morgan Stanley has an office in the World Trade Center, and they've set up an emergency contact phone number for employees and their families. Here's the number. It's 888-883-4391. I'll repeat that. This is for Morgan Stanley to contact for employees and their families. The number is 888-883-4391. And as we mentioned before, it's not just the Yankees and the White Sox game that's been postponed. All of Major League Baseball has postponed its games tonight. Ralph?
That's 1010 Wins reporter Larry Cantor, and we're going to get an update now. What happened in Washington, too? Where a plane went into the Pentagon, and there's been a lot of other things happening in Washington, a state of emergency basically there, and we're going to get a quick update on that, and here's 1010 Wins reporter Doug O'Brien.
Thank you, Ralph. The mandatory evacuation of the U.S. Capitol and its office buildings will continue at least through tonight. Washington is nearly as chaotic as downtown New York is right now. It's all fallout from the attacks, of course, on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Capitol Police spokesman Dan Nichols says they have members of the House and Senate under protective coverage, and we understand now the governor is ready to have something to say. And Ralph, back to you.
All right, Governor Pataki's on the line. Governor, what can you tell us about what happened today at the World Trade Center?
Well, obviously it's a horrific situation, and it's an ongoing crisis, and we've activated our National Guard and emergency police, fire, and EMT services. We're coordinating with the White House and with the city government to make sure that we have the ability to relieve the city police and fire as they go through this. And right now the focus is very simply on helping those whose lives are still at risk and helping to get treatment to those who've been injured. And we're going to continue to do everything we can to help.
Governor, have you any indication at all what the casualty figures might be?
We just can't quantify it at this point. It's obviously a horrific attack, but the focus has to be on helping those whose lives are at risk, helping to make sure we take every possible security step for those who are looking to leave the area and to get assistance to those who are still injured. That's the focus at this point.
Is part of the problem they simply shouldn't be in the building at this point, the rescuers, or are people going in, going into the World Trade Center buildings, or what's left of them?
The emergency services are trying to do everything they can to reach those who are still at risk, but beyond that, I just don't have the specifics, but they've been enormously courageous. Some of them have put themselves in horrendously risky situations to try to help others, and we're going to continue to do everything we can to help those at risk.
Now, the state has facilities in those buildings.
Yes, we do.
And what do you know about the people there?
We just don't know. Obviously, I and a lot of other New Yorkers have a great many friends who were in the towers this morning. We just don't know at this point.
What do you think about all this?
It's a horrific attack upon America and New York, but right now our thoughts have got to be with the families of those whose lives are at risk, and we're going to continue to try to respond and do everything we can to help them.
And Governor Pataki, you mentioned about the National Guard. Does that mean they're actually going to be coming into the city? Or?
Yes, I've spoken with the mayor. We're coordinating. We will have National Guard units coming in to help with the emergency services and to help provide the support that the city needs right now.
And any idea how many troops are involved?
We're mobilizing to the maximum extent possible, and we'll see how many actually are involved in with the response as we go forward.
What about the rest of state facilities? Are office workers being sent home or being offices closed?
State workers in New York, non-essential state workers in New York City have been sent home. State offices across most of the state are still functioning, but the focus right now is on New York City, although we're making sure we have stepped up security at state offices across the state.
Governor, we would greatly appreciate it if you have any more information to get back to us, because you know 1010 Wins kind of covers the city and people need to know information.
Absolutely.
So we'd greatly appreciate it if you have something
I do
to tell
have
us.
some specific information that might be of help.
Oh, let's hear it.
There is limited service on Metro North for people looking to leave the city. They have to go through a security check on 42nd Street to get to Grand Central. There is limited service for people looking to get out to Long Island from Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn and Hunters Point in Queens with the same security precautions. The George Washington Bridge is open for people looking to leave the city. Only emergency services are coming in. The tunnels have been closed, and we're going to continue for security reasons. So we're going to continue to try to help with an orderly movement of the people of the city and provide as much help and support for those whose lives are at risk as we can.
It's hard to comprehend, isn't it?
This is just incomprehensible. It's like something out of a bad horror movie, but we'll do everything we can to get through it.
All right, Governor Pataki. Governor Pataki pointing out that there are state workers who were in that building at the World Trade Center and presumably lost some of those people as well, something we simply don't know at this point. We're going to pause just for a moment to get a look at it. The governor mentioned there is some transportation moving, mainly to get people out of the city who need to leave. And here's Matt Ward with an update on some of the things not happening.
Well, of course, the airports remain closed. Jersey Transit rail service suspended. Northeast Corridor, North Jersey Coastline, Raritan Valley lines as well. New Jersey Transit, all bus service in and out of New York City suspended till further notice. All eastbound rail service into Newark, Hoboken, and New York City also knocked out. Limited service, as the governor mentioned, on Metro North, getting out of Manhattan. And a couple of ferries that are running. You can catch one at Pier 11 and also West 30th Street back to New Jersey. The Throgsneck, Whitestone, Triborough bridges to Queens are open across the Hudson River. Looking at no traffic up on the George Washington Bridge, upper level Lincoln and Holland tunnels. No one being allowed through them right now as we watch it live. And I'm Matt Ward with Shadow Traffic 1010 Wins.
And Matt, we just got this, a small bit of news, but good news is that all the children at the Discovery Center at the World Trade Center are fine, we're told. The parents can pick up their children at St. Vincent's Hospital. All the children at the Children's Discovery Center located at the World Trade Center are fine. The parents can pick up their children at St. Vincent's Hospital there. Again, just going to quickly recap for you folks just joining us. 2 planes went into the 2 twin towers of the World Trade Center. They are presumed to be American Airlines planes that had been hijacked, and there were apparently passengers aboard those planes too after they were hijacked. They went into the towers, and then about an hour and a half after this happened, roughly around 9 o'clock this morning, the towers collapsed, one before the other. That's at the World Trade Center. A severe number of casualties. We don't have any clue whatsoever. The complex has about 50,000 people at any given time, even people, though, passing through the complex, not those just working there. We don't have no idea whatsoever what the casualty might be. One high-ranking police official said it could be in the thousands. Now, connected to this, we certainly believe, anyway, we mentioned the 2 American Airlines planes. United Airlines says it has lost 2 planes. One was a flight out of Newark heading to San Francisco. That plane crashed in western Pennsylvania, not far from Pittsburgh. United says a second plane went down, but they don't know where. That's a plane that had flown out of Boston. So there's where we are there. And in Washington, damaged the Pentagon. A plane went into a section of the Pentagon. A major alert going on in Washington. Evacuations, things pretty well shut down in Washington. Now, let's get back to our reporters. 1010 Wins reporter Juliet Papa. Juliet?
Hi, Ralph. I'm with Ken. He's a gentleman who works here on Worth Street in one of the city agencies. And Ken, tell me what you saw and what you heard this morning.
At the moment of impact, it felt like an earthquake. Shock, disbelief. Then a minute later, my coworker walked me to, he said, look out the window. He walked me to the window, and I looked and I noticed the top 20 floors of the World Trade Center tower were on fire.
Now, I understand you were trying to get home. Tell me what that process was like.
Yes, I live on Staten Island, and I tried to walk to the ferry terminal. And I tried to walk east, and via Water Street, they had blocked traffic, and you couldn't walk via Church Street, you couldn't walk via Broadway, and you couldn't walk via Water Street. There's no way of getting to lower downtown.
So he apparently just came back here to his offices where it's relatively safe, but outside it is like just a ghost town, Ralph. They're just trying to push people north of Canal Street. They're trying to evacuate everything. It's just abandoned cars in streets, abandoned coffee trucks. There are stores that are just shut down and gated already. There is hardly anybody down here as far as I can see when I take a peek upstairs. I just spoke to a transit dispatcher who was dispatching trains right under the World Trade Center, dispatching the E train, which goes right into that World Trade Center. He heard the explosion. He heard this rumble. He thought there was some sort of construction explosion, and he said it was almost like a delayed reaction when he started seeing people coming down, just dazed and confused, and then they were all told to evacuate and shut the train system down. Ralph?
1010 Wins reporter Juliet Papa again. We have no idea what the casualty figures might be and the explosions and with the planes going into the World Trade Center, but perhaps the figures could be in the thousands. We simply don't know. 1010 Wins reporter Ben Mevrak is with us too. Ben?
I'm a few blocks now around the perimeter of where the World Trade Center once stood, and it was wonderful news to hear you report just a few minutes ago about the children being safe from the daycare center. And as I traveled through the streets around the perimeter of the Trade Center area, there are similar stories all around, stories that really are uplifting in what otherwise is a very dark hour here for the city. People who have opened up their stores that were on the perimeter of the area, coming out with bottles of water and bringing them over to the EMTs and to the other personnel who might need them. Others came down from some of the boroughs, came in with offering their trucks that they might use for their businesses in case they needed transport officers from one position to another. So those are some of the nice things that are going on as New Yorkers pull together. But as I look straight ahead and I see the plume, the dark smoke continue to just come up from the earth and cover what is lower Manhattan, it is just the unspeakable horror that we're going to have to deal with for the days and days to come. Some of the descriptions offered to me by some of the eyewitnesses, too horrific even to put on the radio. It just, it will be days, perhaps weeks or months before we actually understand the full impact of what has happened here. I was on the Manhattan Bridge when the second tower collapsed. It's a sight that myself and the others on the bridge will never forget. And also, as we talked a little bit earlier, with one of the EMTs who was in there and was rescued by a cameraman from a television station. Their only way out of the rubble was with the light from the camera, and he thanked him for saving his life. And now, though, the EMT is looking for his partner who disappeared during their attempts to rescue. He's been unable to connect to him. So these are just some of the stories that are just beginning to emerge as we continue to follow this devastating story. Val?
All right, Ben Mevrak has been suggesting that the unknown is a big factor here. Who did this and why? How many people died or injured at the World Trade Center? What about the two planes that went down that United has been reporting? And the people on the American Airlines flights, the two planes that apparently had been hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center today. You're listening to live continuing coverage here on 1010 Wins. Our reporters down in Lower Manhattan, the focus of all this. By the way, we just got the word New Jersey Transit halting all rail service on Northeast Corridor, North Jersey, Coastline, Raritan Valley. A complete wrap-up in just a couple of minutes on just what is shut down and what is not operating. And President Bush is not returning to Washington. The White House is not saying where he is heading, but the president was out of Washington at the time. Parts of the White House have been evacuated. Other major buildings were evacuated. We're now told the president is not returning to Washington. That did not necessarily mean there was a threat on him. Let's go to 1010 Wins reporter Steve Kastenbaum. Steve?
Ralph, I'm down here in the basement of the Surrogate Courts building behind City Hall, which is where a lot of the civilians were pushed into, and many of the other basements of the municipal buildings down here right after the first tower collapsed. It shook and rocked everything here in Lower Manhattan and in downtown Brooklyn. If we can just take you back a couple of hours and give you a sense of how this felt when this all began. At a little bit after 8:45, you heard a loud explosion, at least where I was in my vantage point in downtown Brooklyn, and I looked out my window and I could see the most incredible, unbelievable sight, one of the World Trade Center buildings on fire. Then about another 15-20 minutes later, I had turned my back. I heard another explosion. The windows began rattling. My building shook, and I am at least a good 3 or 4 miles away from the World Trade Center. And I looked out my window, and sure enough, the second building was on fire. A great fireball was going up from the second plane that hit that building. Then I tried getting into Lower Manhattan. At that point, the city had been cordoned off, and people were being evacuated, being told just to literally walk out of Lower Manhattan. They were crossing over the Brooklyn Bridge by the thousands. Meanwhile, heading in the opposite direction, dozens upon dozens of emergency vehicles. Firefighters who were off duty were just standing at the foot of the bridge, waiting for room in a vehicle. They were commandeering trucks and heading across the bridge to get to the emergency scene. Also here in Lower Manhattan, many of the city building engineers ran towards the building when they heard the explosion, ran towards the World Trade Center. Among them was Steve. He heard the first explosion while he was in the basement in a boiler room.
I heard a crash. I mean, the whole building shook. We went upstairs, and then all of a sudden, maybe like 5-10 minutes later, the second plane hit.
You saw the plane hit?
Saw the plane hit. I think it was a ball of fire. Ball of fire.
And he was among the many people who witnessed a horrific sight, office workers in the World Trade Center building jumping out of the upper floors to their death below. Presumably, there were many people in the office buildings when this happened, not too far away from 9 a.m. Both buildings are home to somewhere around 50,000 employees. So again, we have no idea what the death toll is going to be, but of course it'll be presumably extremely high. Steve Kastenbaum, 1010 Wins, live behind City Hall.
Again, we do not know, too. One ranking police police officials saying the death toll could be in the thousands, and of course then you add the number of people injured. We do expect to hear from President Bush shortly. We told you he's not returning to Washington. We're going to go live to the president as soon as he's ready to speak. In the meantime, we'll go back to Pete Torriello because transportation is a big factor. Mainly, Matt Ward, about a rush to get out of town, and that's part of what they're trying to serve right now, the people getting out of that area.
That's right. They have opened the Throgs Neck, Whitestone, and Trowbridge heading back over to Queens, and the Queensboro Bridge and the Midtown Tunnel are also open for those headed back over to Queens. The Hudson River crossings are still closed. In fact, I don't see anybody moving an inch on the Cross Bronx westbound side as I look in on the 1010 Winds Jam Cam over by the area of the Deegan as you try to get to the George Washington Bridge. Police are requesting all traffic avoid westbound LIE, Southern State and Northern State, and the westbound LIE being closed to Route 135. Police are also shutting down the Meadowbrook, the Wantagh, and the Saginaw Coast. Just limited service on Long Island Railroad out of New York City. All the airports remain closed. No Jersey transit service on the Northeast Corridor, North Jersey coastline, Raritan Valley lines as well, and just limited service on Metro North trains out of town. Ralph?
That is Matt Ward with the very latest on the travel situation. Again, we do plan to hear from President Bush just momentarily. We should point out, though, just to recap for you folks just joining us, here's what happened. It was almost 4 hours ago that a plane went into one tower of the World Trade Center. Went in the upper floors, a gaping hole, fire and smoke. Then about a half hour later, a second plane went in. These were hijacked planes, presumably hijacked American Airlines flights. They went in, and then about an hour and a half later, one tower went down, the upper floors collapsed, and then the same at the other tower. People trapped inside. We have no idea what the casualty figures are, no doubt in the thousands, even when it comes to a death toll. And then two planes went down, two United Airlines planes went down. One went Pittsburgh. We don't know where the other is. That plane that went down near Pittsburgh was flown out of Newark heading for San Francisco. And Washington, damage at the Pentagon. A plane went into one of the walls there. And that's where we stand. Now, let's get a quick update from Larry Cantor, who's keeping up to date on many of the things that are not happening here in the city of New York because of this terrible tragedy. Larry?
Well, Ralph, one of the things not happening is Lower Manhattan. The mayor is asking people down there to remain calm, but get out. He's saying just walk slowly, calmly to the north. He says there's no reason to panic. Then go home, he says, and stay home. Now, that's easier said than done, of course, because transportation is all blocked up. There's no subway service, and there are very few ways to get out of town at all. Metro North has some limited service, but the tunnels and the bridges, as Matt Ward was saying, are closed. So just make your way uptown and hang out, I guess. And as the day goes on, I'm sure there will be some ways to get people to their homes in the outer boroughs and to New Jersey and to Connecticut. Let me play you just an eyewitness who was there when this thing all began.
I was by J&R Music World when the first building started to fall, and this was all from smoke.
And you're all covered with ash and gray.
And that's from all the way on the other side. Now the other building just fell.
That was an eyewitness to what was going on in Lower Manhattan, speaking to our Stan Brooks. Our John Montone was on the scene shortly after the first plane crash.
When I arrived here, which was about a half an hour, 40 minutes after the initial explosion, I was able to get down to a Church Street, literally in the middle of the two towers, and they were both on fire at that point. It never occurred to me that they were going to come down. I guess it should have, but at that point, even early on, Church Street was looked like a war zone. It would have been impossible to get regular vehicles through that. There were just pieces of cement and this white ash all over. At that point, I was able to get back up to Broadway, and there were people running in the other direction still away from the building, people telling me that they had seen the second plane hit. And excuse me, I have a lot of this dust in my lungs, but they had seen the second plane hit, and they said that it looked like it was going directly at the building, that it didn't hit the first plane, that it was a purposeful strike on the building.
That's John Montone. Earlier today, he was one of the first down at the scene of the crash at the World Trade Center, the first crash and then the second one. St. Vincent's Catholic Medical Center in Lower Manhattan has put out a call for plastic surgeons and burn specialists. And here's the number they should call, 212-752-4805. That's 212-752-4805 for plastic surgeons and burn specialists. The call is also going out from New York City for blood. New York City's hospitals are calling in all staffers, surgeons, nurses to deal with the massive potential for injuries and deaths. The Board of Education hasn't decided yet when it's going to close schools today. Right now, they're keeping all the students in schools. No decision has been made regarding buses and other transportation for New York City students. The stock markets are closed and could remain that way for several days. The impact internationally from that is anybody's guess. Yankees and White Sox game, and all baseball games for that matter, have been postponed tonight. And the subways remain shut down as a precaution. All the children at the Children's Discovery Center located in the World Trade Center itself are fine. The parents can pick them up at St. Vincent's Hospital. Ralph?
Well, speaking of St. Vincent's Hospital, Larry Cantor, we're going live right now to Terry Sheridan, our live continuing coverage of the crashes into the World Trade Center and other acts of terrorism in the country. Now, at St. Vincent's, I guess probably dozens of people have been taken there. Terry, what have you got, Terry?
Well,
Sheridan?
right now we have 184 that have been taken here, and as we had a press briefing about 10 minutes ago, more since that had happened. The workers, or the people that I see that are going into the hospital, coming out of the ambulances, are walking out. They all appear, though, to be rescue workers. They have the sort of hard hats and the vests on to give that they are rescue workers. What's also happening here is 11th Street is just closed. It's a sea of people seeking information on loved ones. So again, the latest numbers that we have are 184 have been taken to St. Vincent's. 10 of those are critical. Live at St. Vincent's Hospital, Terry Sheridan, 1010 wins.
Now, in just a moment, we'll get a recap from Doug O'Brien what happened at the Pentagon and some other things been happening around the country related, no doubt related anyway, to what's happened here in New York with the two planes, hijacked planes crashing into the twin towers of the World Trade Center. We just heard from Terry Sheridan about injuries. We have no idea what the casualty toll could be here in New York at the World Trade Center. I do have two numbers I'm going to give you for American Airlines and for United Airlines for people to call. And we hope this is something you listening to us right now will not need, but I'm going to give these numbers out, so if you want to grab a pencil or something. But these are numbers about relatives who may be on these flights. Here are the numbers. American Airlines, 1-800-245-0999. 1-800-245-0999. United Airlines, and one of those planes did leave from Newark, heading for San Francisco, of the United plane that crashed. The United number is 1-800-932-855. 1-800-932-8555. Let's go to Newark Airport. We mentioned one of those planes, United plane that went down in western Pennsylvania, flew out of Newark Airport, but basically nothing else flying around the country. Let's go to 1010 Wins reporter Mark O'Brien.
And Ralph, as you could imagine, a scene of confusion and chaos here at Newark Airport. The entire facility is shut down. Every entrance and exit is blockaded by either huge concrete walls or Port Authority trucks, and police officers are actually checking every single car and van that makes its way in and out of the airport. Right now, the only people being allowed in are folks who are here to pick up their loved ones. There is a lot of confusion. People are crossing the highways, the inner roadways, just looking for any transportation, whether it be a cab or a bus, just to get out of Newark Airport. As you mentioned, one of the planes involved in this morning's tragedy apparently left here, was bound for San Francisco, and crashed in western Pennsylvania. No word yet if any of the grieving family members or friends and relatives are gathering here to check on the status of their loved ones they dropped off early this morning. So again, Newark Airport right now, a scene of confusion and chaos. People don't know how to get out of here. They don't know how they're going to get home. Some were traveling overseas. They have no way out, and right now the airport remains shut down. And the eerie sight off in the distance behind the airport, the smoke continues to billow into the sky where the World Trade Center once stood. Mark O'Brien, 1010 Wins, live at Newark Airport.
Well, that just gives you a sample, though, the magnitude of what's happening today, because all around the country, people traveling for vacation, business, whatever, are not going anywhere. There are no flights right now. A lot of rail service in and out of New York is shut down, and immediate transportation in New York City itself, of course, shut down, too, basically. We'll have a rundown of just where we are in that in a moment. Let's get a quick update from Doug O'Brien, if we can, Doug, and just what we know about the Pentagon there and elsewhere in Washington.
Ralph, a TV station in Washington, WUSA, is reporting that it's been told by a Navy spokesman that there are fatalities in the plane crash into the Pentagon this morning. The plane hit on the opposite side from Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld's office. It's not known what the plane was, although it is it's believed to be a commercial airliner. Several unexplained explosions in D.C., one outside state and one outside the Supreme Court. Vice President Cheney, National Security Advisor Rice, and other top federal officials are huddled in the wake of the terrorist attacks. The federal Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, has opened up an operations center. FEMA officials will not disclose any details of their plan other than to say they're working with the White House, FBI, and other agencies. At the Pentagon, spokesman Glenn Flood said all the Defense Department's leaders were safe, including Secretary Rumsfeld. Senior officials staffed the agency's National Military Command Center, a secure room in the Pentagon. Rumsfeld and other top officials left the building. They're at an undisclosed location. Pentagon is saying there are contingency plans, but they won't go into any details. President Bush, as you've heard, is not in Washington. He is currently in Louisiana and will have something to say to the nation about this later. Secretary of State Powell is returning from South America, where he had been on an OAS trip. A couple of airline notes for you. The terminals at Los Angeles International have been evacuated in response to this morning's terrorist attack in New York and Washington. Cleveland Airport says an airliner made an emergency landing there after the pilot said he was worried that there might be an explosive device on that aircraft. There's been no further word on that. Also, many people are finding it very difficult to get information about anything online about the terrorist attacks. Internet traffic jams have slowed web access, especially for users trying to reach major news sites. Do move slowly there. It will be some time before all the information comes in to the radio station. Ralph?
All right, Doug O'Brien there. Now let's get right back to Matt Ward, because, again, transportation a big factor for a lot of people. In fact, it's kind of frozen here in New York, and not a lot of people traveling. Matt Ward?
Ralph, and anyone trying to get across the Hudson, the only way to do it right now is the Tappan Zee, which is kind of busy up on that span either way as I look in on the 1010 Winds Jam Cam. Further down the Hudson, still no traffic on the George Washington Bridge, the Lincoln or Holland Tunnel. They have opened the Throgneck, Whitestone, and Triborough for those heading to Queens, and the Queensboro Bridge and the Midtown Tunnel also open for those heading back to Queens. Police have been closing down the westbound LIE, Southern State and Northern State, coming through Nassau County, heading towards the Queens line. It's going to be a good place to avoid. They don't really want any traffic on those westbound roadways in Long Island heading for the city. Generally speaking, you want to try to move away from the city, east or westbound, depending on where you are, and also north or southbound, too. The airports remain closed. Jersey Transit rail service knocked out. Northeast Corridor, North Jersey Coastline, Raritan Valley, just limited service on Metro North out of Manhattan. No Amtrak service on the Northeast Corridor, and you will find limited service on Long Island Railroad coming out of Manhattan as well. Ralph?
All right, Matt Ward, there's where we are. Mayor Giuliani says hospitals need as much help as they can get, and this applies to if you're an emergency worker, you're just waking up, a firefighter, an EMS, a police, a nurse. You really need to call your office if you can, or even just go there, because we need help. New York Mayor, well, we know Rudy Giuliani saying that hospitals need as much help as they can get, saying 50 hospitals are in service right now, and he expects that number to climb to more than 100. I want to go back to something we mentioned about the Pentagon, where a plane crashed into a wall of the Pentagon, set that on fire, and there are casualties at the Pentagon as well. And it is believed that that was a commercial airliner that went into the Pentagon. And as we've been reporting here in 1010 Winds, two United planes disappeared, in effect, one crashing in western Pennsylvania, and another one, the United said, crashed a flight out of Boston, but it wasn't sure where it crashed. That had 56 passengers aboard, and that one was flying from Boston to Los Angeles. The plane flying out of Newark, the one that crashed in Pennsylvania, was Flight 93, and that crashed southeast of Pittsburgh on the way from Newark to San Francisco. So that might be what happened to that other United plane. That might be the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. That's something we simply don't know at this time. Let's go live now to 1010 Winds reporter John Montone. He's in Greenwich Village, not all that far from where the terrible tragedy occurred today. The two planes crashing into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. John Montone?
And, Ralph, I have seen really most of what has happened this morning. I was on the scene when the two towers were burning, and then I was caught in that horrible collapse of the first tower where thousands of us were trapped inside a building on Broadway, trying desperately to get out before we choked to death. Now, I was able to go back to Broadway near City Hall, which is just literally covered. It looks as if there was a snowstorm of sort of a gray dirt that swept across the city, and it's full of emergency personnel, police officers. They're not letting anybody around that area, although I was able to go back in and to get our truck out of there and then join what is now become an exodus, which began, I guess, about an hour ago, an exodus north. Now, this gentleman I spoke to here, and hopefully we can hear him well enough. He was describing what happened. He had a store at 120 Broadway, and when the initial explosion came, he began shutting up his store, and then came the terrible collapse.
I was trying to close my store. but I could not close the store, and I run away. When the big noise comes, then I run away, and I went inside this building. I was trying to close my store, but I can't. People, so many rush, so I just leave the store like that and run away.
Did you see the trade center collapse?
Yeah, I saw that. Then I saw that.
What?
The building was 120 building was they closed the door, entrance was closed. The people was rush. Then the security guy comes, then he opened the door and everybody's rush inside.
So you were inside a building?
No, when the crowd, that time I was.
And what happened to him, he was also inside a building with literally thousands of people trying to get out. It was a very common experience. Now, since about an hour ago, the air has cleared a bit. The breeze seems to be blowing the heavy smoke and dust down toward the lower bay, down toward the Battery. And there has been just an exodus of people walking up. Some of them are in pretty good shape. Some of them are relaxed. They know they got out of it alive. Others are hysterical. They left workers behind. They know the people in the World Trade Center. They're unable to get in touch with their loved ones. But it is very orderly. People are just walking up an exodus of cars, the cars that were able to get out of there. I was fortunate to be able to do that, and people just going up. But the question everyone keeps asking is, how can we get out of the city? Can we get home? Can we get to Queens? Can we get to Brooklyn? Can we get to New Jersey? So those traffic reports are very important as well. And there's a lot of people here who are not going to hospitals, who don't feel they want to take up space because there are so many people more seriously injured, but they're still having a tough time breathing because of this horrible air that we encountered down by the scene. Ralph?
That is 10-Time Wins reporter John Montone in Greenwich Village with the very latest from his viewpoint, talking to people there. We just got the word that President Bush says the military is in high alert status around the country. We do expect to hear from the president momentarily. Of course, we'll broadcast that live on 10-10 Wins. And we also expect right after the president speaks to hear from the FBI, telling what happened, because we have been a target of a major terrorist attack here in New York and elsewhere in the United States. And it does appear to be a very well-coordinated terror attack with at least 4 planes apparently hijacked, stolen, whatever, 2 of them crashing into the World Trade Center, 1 crashing near Pittsburgh. We're not sure if that was definitely connected or not, but there was an American Airlines plane out of Boston. And then United says it lost another plane, and there is some speculation that it might be the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Casualties at the Pentagon, untold number of people killed or injured here in New York when the 2 planes went into the upper floors of the World Trade Center, and then later both the tops of the 2 towers collapsing. So we simply just don't know how many. We just checked at St. Vincent's Hospital, 186 people there alone, 50 hospitals pressed into service, ambulances coming in from Bergen County, for example, and all around, emergency personnel being rushed in. Again, we expect to hear from the president momentarily. Let's hear from, and we'll go live to that on 10-10 Wins. But Steve Kastenbaum, here we are now just about... a little over 4 hours now since it happened. Steve Kastenbaum on duty in Lower Manhattan.
Well, Ralph, I'm sitting here now on the steps outside a courthouse behind City Hall on Chambers Street. Finally came out of the basement. A very different scene from what was here many hours ago. Folks were just running every which way, panicking, some screaming, some crying, others in total shock as they watched one by one the 2 World Trade Center buildings just come tumbling down onto Lower Manhattan. The debris cloud has since settled on everything in the area, as deep as 4 inches thick. But right now, we still see thick, black, acrid smoke billowing from the World Trade Center, heading south over towards Brooklyn. The folks are still streaming out of Lower Manhattan by foot, walking over the Brooklyn Bridge and up towards Canal Street. Everybody's still trying to get out of the area. We still have many sirens and the sounds of emergency vehicles heading towards the World Trade Center. The emergency rooms, the hospitals downtown here are filled. We are just trying to get a handle and a grasp on what exactly is going on down here. Most people still in a state of shock, many of them covering their mouths and telling stories of watching people jump from the burning buildings high atop the 80th and 81st floors to their deaths below. Steve Kastenbaum, 10-10 Wins, live on Chambers Street in Lower Manhattan.
We'll be going back to our reporters. A full recap coming right up. John Montone mentioned the urgency of knowing about transportation. A full recap on that coming right up here on 10-10 Wins. We also expect to hear from the president and then the FBI. You're listening to live continuing coverage of the major terrorism attack here in New York and other parts of the country on 10-10 Wins, WINS, New York.
Breaking news now on 1010 Wins.
Good afternoon. Here's the scenario right now as we have it at a little after 1 o'clock. It was about 4 hours ago, a little before that, when one plane, apparently a hijacked American airliner, crashed into one of the towers at the World Trade Center. Then about a half hour later, a second plane crashed into the other tower. And then about an hour and a half after that happened, the top parts of both towers collapsed, one before the other. An unknown number of people died when those planes went into the buildings, and then perhaps in the collapses if they were not able to get out of the building after the first hits by those airplanes. We have no idea how many people died, and we also have no idea how many people were injured, but it could be running into the thousands. There was a direct hit at the Pentagon. Apparently was a commercial airliner that was hijacked. It might be United Airlines plane that United says that it lost, that went down. Another United Airline plane crashed near Pittsburgh. That plane was Flight 93. That was flying out of Newark. It was heading to San Francisco, and so we've had at least 4 planes hijacked and 4 down, and in each case, apparently, there were passengers aboard those 4 planes. We'll hear about the Pentagon and what happened there in a moment. Other things happening in Washington, and but first, let's get an update on the travel situation because things are jammed up or not happening at all. Here's Matt Ward.
So, Ralph, as you know, the airports remain closed off. Jersey Transit, no rail service. Northeast Corridor, North Jersey Coastline, Raritan Valley Line. Amtrak also disrupted on the Northeast Corridor. Just limited service on both Long Island Railroad out of New York City and on Metro North trains out of New York City. If you're trying to get a boat back over to Jersey, you do have ferry service available running at Pier 11 and also at West 30th Street. Battery Tunnel still closed off either way, as are the Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Williamsburg bridges. The Verrazano is closed getting to Brooklyn, but open to Staten Island. Throgs Neck, Whitestone, and Triborough are open if you need to get to Queens, and so are the Queensboro Bridge and the Midtown Tunnel, but they're all closed coming into Manhattan, and all the Hudson River crossings still closed off either way. I don't see any traffic moving on the Cross Bronx westbound into the George Washington Bridge, and I still don't spot any traffic up on the George Washington Bridge in either direction. Ralph?
All right, 1010 Wins reporter, shadow reporter Matt Ward with an update on traffic. 1010 Wins senior correspondent Stan Brooks is in Lower Manhattan. Stan?
Yeah, just chaos here. People running around. They still don't know where to go. I found some people who were here from Norway, and they were staying in an apartment right near the World Trade Center.
We are visiting my nephew, her son. Yeah. And we heard the Big Bang this morning. It's close to Trade Center, and we have this little child here, so we were really terrified. But we have stayed indoors, taping our windows for a long time. But now, eventually, they said on television we had to move north. So that's why we are evacuating the child and ourselves.
Did you hear the explosion?
Yes, very well. It was really something very special. The building was shaking all over. So terrifying. Terrifying sound, because we thought maybe it was some construction going on, but we heard it wasn't. It was a very bad sound, much louder.
Very loud, very scary, very shaking, and they were still shaking as they were wheeling the baby carriage with their little son, not knowing where they were going, just evacuating the area, trying to get to a safe place. And right now, nobody seems to know where a safe place is, but they were all heading north. Stan Brooks, 1010 Wins, reporting live from Lower Manhattan. And a plane going overhead making people nervous.
All right, Stan Brooks, and we have some information here. A Virginia congressman is estimating the death toll at around 10,000. Now, I don't know where this man is getting this from, or Congressman Jim Moran, but that's an estimate from a congressman. I don't know what that is based on.
Out of Washington, he's talking to
out of Washington,
plane crashes.
About the plane crashes at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. It may be a combined of 10,000, according to this Virginia congressman. Again, we do expect to hear from President Bush momentarily. The president has said the military is on full alert, and once we hear from the president, we'll hear from the FBI to tell us what they know about this terror attack. Just to repeat, 2 planes, hijacked planes, American Airlines planes, crashing into the World Trade Center. They later collapsed. Casualties there. Another plane, apparently hijacked, a United Airlines plane going into the Pentagon, casualties there, and another United plane crashing southeast of Pittsburgh with casualties there as well. That plane flew out of Newark, the United flight heading from Newark to San Francisco. Let's hear about the Pentagon and other things happening in Washington. Here's 1010 Wins reporter Doug O'Brien.
Ralph, first we want to relay to you a statement from the Taliban, the hardliners in Afghanistan. They condemned the devastating terrorist attack in New York and Washington on Tuesday, rejecting suggestions that Osama bin Laden was behind them. The Taliban Taliban's ambassador to neighboring Pakistan, Abdul Salam Saif, said bin Laden, the Saudi dissident, of course, who's been given asylum in Afghanistan, does not have the facilities to carry out such an attack. It's premature to level allegations against a person who's not in a position to carry them out, is what he said. UN sanctions currently in place against Afghanistan to press the Taliban to hand over bin Laden. We also have a statement from Hamas in the West Bank. They say, quote, "First of all, we don't support attacks on civilians and don't support aggression toward innocent people. However, the United States should revise its current stance as to look again at its position very carefully toward people all over the world. If the U.S. doesn't want to be targeted and suffer the same way as other people are through aggression, oppression, injustice, and exploitation. In that regard, America finds itself today weakened in the face of the rest of humanity taking its own revenge against American oppression and injustice." That from Hamas in the West Bank. In Washington, a direct and devastating hit on the Pentagon, and now reports of dead people in the military seat of power in the U.S. A fiery plane crash believed to be an airliner collapsed one side of the five-sided structure opposite the office of Defense Secretary Rumsfeld. There are casualties, and one television station in Washington says it's been told by a Navy spokesman that, in fact, there are dead people in the Pentagon. Fox News Channel correspondent David Schuster says smoke is still coming from the building.
When we arrived here, we started getting reports from people inside the Pentagon of on the south side, on the outer ring, and remember there are 5 or 6 different rings of offices at the Pentagon, of a ball of fire, of a large explosion, approximately 9:40. At first, there were some conflicting accounts about whether an airplane was actually involved, because a lot of people in the Pentagon did not hear an airplane flying overhead. But then witnesses outside of the Pentagon, who had a clear vantage point of the helipad, described a silver and red U.S. airplane, according to the eyewitnesses, described as a 737 that flew too low and crashed into the side. Counterintelligence sources are confirming to Fox News that it was a commercial aircraft that was apparently hijacked and flown into the Pentagon.
Washington is jammed with people who've been sent home early, just like Lower Manhattan. Businesses and government closing up and dismissing their workers, the sidewalks teeming with pedestrians making their way toward bus stops and metro subway stations. Metro trains crowded, the streets packed with cars. For the most part, people are making their way in a calm, orderly fashion, though there is a sense of purpose there. There are lines at ATMs and public phones, as many people report having trouble getting signals on their wireless phones. Someone mentioned, Ralph, a few moments ago that people were nervous after hearing an airplane go overhead in Manhattan. Bear in mind that when the airport closures nationwide were ordered, there were some 50 aircraft still in the air. Those are being allowed to proceed to their destinations. There may yet be a plane or two in the air today headed toward a New York airport from somewhere else. They have been allowed to continue on and land as normal. Ralph?
All right, Doug O'Brien with an update there. You're listening to live continuing coverage on 1010 Wins of the terrorist attack here in New York and elsewhere in the country. 2 planes, hijacked American Airlines planes, apparently crashing into the World Trade Center. One before 9 o'clock, a little after that, and then about an hour and a half later, the top portions of both those towers collapsed. We have no idea what the casualties might be. There's a congressman. We're not sure where he might be getting his information from, but overall, talking about a death toll at around 10,000. This is Virginia Congressman Jim Moran. Perhaps he's been talking to federal officials, talking about casualties in New York, as well as at the Pentagon, and the 4 planes that apparently were hijacked and have crashed today. 2 American and 2 United. Let's go live to 1010 Wins reporter Al Jones. Al?
Well, Doug was mentioning planes flying overhead, and every time one of these planes comes over, and there aren't that many, but they attract a lot of attention, a lot more than probably, say, 5 hours ago. People stop and stare, even will get a little scared when they hear a plane go over. An unusual response here in New York.
All right, Al, we're going to interrupt you right here. We're going to listen to what... Oh, never mind, Al. Al, go ahead. We thought it was the president, but it is not. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Al.
Nope, not the president yet. Rather, you also mentioned that there's a sort of calm down here, and that's right. It's kind of amazing that only 4 hours after this occurred that people are almost starting to go about their normal business. Some of the stores are opening. Some of the folks are, heading back to work. Obviously, the big office buildings are all closed. Government's closed. People are being asked to leave the area, but for the most part, it's rather orderly. A lot of people just sitting around kind of taking it all in. Now, before the second collapse early this morning, I ran into Tom Colden, who was shuffling up West Broadway, absolutely covered head to toe with ash and debris.
Working at my desk like everybody else. The building swayed. We're almost knocked over our feet. And we heard on the way down the stairs that it was a small plane that hit. It took us about an hour and a half to get down to the stage. main concourse. At that point, another huge explosion went off. I have no idea what time it was, and the ceiling fell down and the lights went out.
Are you okay? Golden, not okay, very shaken up. He was on the 64th floor of World Trade Tower number 1 when the first plane crashed. Ironically, Golden was also here 7 years ago. He said 3 people that he know perished in that terrorist attack, and right now he's just totally concerned with people he works with, people he knows, people in the building who didn't get out. Ralph?
All right, that's 1010 Wins reporter Al Jones. I'm going to give you a recap where we are right now. Then we'll look at travel in this area, what's not happening, because planes basically shut down around the country. They're open at the airports just for people to land. A lot of rail service is not happening around New York as either, and some of the bridges and so on. All right, we're going to go to President Bush here.
To save lives.
President Bush.
And to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families.